I had always considered myself a rational man, someone who trusted the solidity of facts, the comfort of predictable routines, and the logic that kept my world intact. But ever since my mother-in-law, Margaret, moved into our house, that world began to shift, slowly at first, like floorboards settling in the night, and then with a force that hollowed out everything I thought I understood. My wife assured me it would be temporary, just until Margaret recovered from her injury. 3 months at most. I told myself I could endure anything for 3 months, but I hadn't known then the way shadows lengthen around certain people, or how a single presence can twist air into something sharp enough to cut. It started with small things, objects moving from where I had left them, lights flickering only when I entered a room, the faint tapping sounds inside the walls at night, the kind of occurrences you explain away as forgetfulness, faulty wiring, or mice, except that the tapping always stopped the moment I stood still to listen. And the flickering never happened when my wife was around. But Margaret, she always seemed to be watching when it did. She never said anything, just smiled a thin, knowing smile, as though she were holding a private joke between the house and her. I tried ignoring it, but something about the way her eyes followed me, not with hostility, but something colder, like curiosity, made the hair on my arms rise. Then I began to hear her voice at night, at first muffled, drifting faintly through the hallway, too soft to make out the words. I thought she was talking on the phone until I realized she never carried one to bed. The whispers grew clearer over the next few nights. They curled under my door like smoke, a slow murmur, rhythmic, almost chant-like. I pressed my ear to the wood once, heart pounding, breath shallow. The hallway beyond was dark, still, but the whispering continued, rising and falling like waves. I forced myself to open the door, flicked on the hallway light. Nothing. Silence. Margaret's room was closed, as always. I told myself to stop imagining things. Stress, I thought. Exhaustion. But as I stepped back into my room, I felt the undeniable sensation that someone had been standing right behind me, watching, breathing, waiting. Over the following days, the house itself seemed to shift its temperament. Rooms felt colder, though the thermostat remained unchanged. The shadows in corners clung longer, stretched wider, and somehow seemed darker than they should be. Sometimes, when I passed the staircase, I caught a glimpse of movement at the very top, like someone slipping out of sight. My wife insisted everything was fine, but she was rarely home these days, taking extra shifts, leaving me alone with Margaret and whatever else lingered in the house. And Margaret had begun humming to herself, low, tuneless vibrations that seeped under doors and drifted from room to room. They didn't sound like any melody I recognized, more like the droning of insects under the soil. One evening, as I sat in the living room trying to distract myself with television, I noticed something odd about the family photos on the wall. They were crooked, all of them, tilted just slightly to the right, as though someone had run a finger along each frame. I stood to fix them, brushing it off as accidental, but the moment I returned to the couch, a soft creaking sound made me turn back. One frame, the largest, shifted before my eyes, the corner lowering on its own. I froze. For a full minute I just watched, breath held, waiting for another sign. Nothing. I stepped closer, fingertips brushing the cool edge of the photo. A sudden chill swept across the back of my neck, sharp enough to make me flinch. I spun around. No one there. But from the staircase above came soft, slow footsteps. I called out, "Margaret!" My voice cracked. No response. The footsteps stopped abruptly, replaced by an airy, whisper-thin laugh. Not mocking, worse, amused. I gripped the railing and climbed, each step heavier than the last. At the top, the hallway stretched before me like a tunnel carved from shadow. Margaret's door was slightly open, a thin pulse of dim light flickering inside. I pushed it gently. The room was empty. The light came from a lamp on the nightstand, swaying faintly as though someone had just brushed past it. I stood there, letting the silence thicken around me. Then I saw it. A scrap of paper on the bed, my name written across it in Margaret's shaky handwriting, beneath it 2 words. "I hear you." A prickle of fear crawled up my spine. I backed out slowly, closed the door, and tried to steady my breathing. When I turned, Margaret stood at the end of the hallway. I hadn't heard her approach. She stared at me with wide, unblinking eyes, her thin hands clasped behind her back, her pale face stretched into that same unsettling smile. "Is something wrong?" she asked softly, too softly, as though she already knew. I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came. She tilted her head slightly, as though examining me from a new angle. "You look tired," she whispered. "You should rest. The walls keep too many secrets when you don't." I didn't sleep that night. Not really. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the weight of her gaze pressing against them, and beneath it all, the faintest sound, the whispering again. Except this time it wasn't outside my door. It was inside my room. It rose and fell like breath, sometimes close to my ear, sometimes drifting above my head. I kept the lights on until morning. When the sun finally broke through the curtains, I felt a brief moment of relief, until I noticed the new scratch marks on the inside of my bedroom door. Long, thin, fresh. And that was when I realized Margaret wasn't trying to scare me. She was trying to break me, piece by piece, quietly, patiently. The next morning, I found Margaret already in the kitchen, humming that same low, discordant vibration. Steam curled from the teapot, fogging the window beside her. She turned as I entered, that unnerving smile still painted across her face. Her eyes scanned me, slowly, deliberately, like she was evaluating the fractures forming inside me. I forced myself to act normal, though my hands trembled as I reached for a mug. She watched the tremor. Her smile deepened. "Rough night?" she asked lightly. I told her I didn't sleep well. She nodded, as though pleased by the answer. Then she slid a plate toward me. Eggs scrambled into uneven clumps, toast burnt around the edges, not at all like her usual meticulous cooking. I hesitated. She nudged the plate closer. "Eat. You'll need your strength." Her tone was sweet, but the words settled in my gut like stones. As I chewed mechanically, she leaned on the counter, eyes never leaving me. "This house is difficult," she murmured. "It plays tricks on people who aren't used to it." I froze mid-bite. "What do you mean?" I asked. She shrugged, her expression shifting momentarily into something colder. Old houses remember things. They don't always like new inhabitants, disturbing their rest. She reached out and gently tapped the table with her fingernail. Once, twice, 3 times. The same rhythm I'd heard tapping through the walls. My chest tightened. I tried to ask more, but she lifted a finger to her lips. "Shh." The walls are listening. I left the table abruptly, unable to stand the atmosphere any longer. As I walked down the hallway, the floorboards creaked beneath my steps. Normal old house sounds, except the creaks followed me, precisely, step for step, like an echo that thought too long before returning. I spun around, expecting to see her. No one. The air behind me felt heavy, as though someone had just moved out of the spot where I stood. My pulse pounded in my ears. I went to my study and shut the door, needing a moment to pull myself together. But as soon as I sat down, the lights flickered. Once, twice. Then the room plunged into darkness. A soft whisper rose from the corner, not Margaret's voice, something older, something slow and deliberate, as though it had been waiting for the chance to speak. My scalp prickled with ice. I reached blindly for the desk lamp. The second it clicked on, the whispering stopped. The room looked normal again, except for the papers scattered across the floor. They hadn't been there before. I knelt, picking them up. My breath caught when I saw the writing. Page after page, covered in shaky, frantic scrawling. My name repeated dozens of times. Some letters smudged, as though written with trembling fingers. Others nearly carved through the paper, and on the final page, one sentence stood alone in thick, uneven strokes. She's not alone in the house. I dropped the stack, heart hammering. I didn't recognize the handwriting. It wasn't mine. It wasn't my wife's. And it wasn't Margaret's. Someone else had written these. Someone I had never seen. A cold dread settled over me. Was this house haunted? Was Margaret involved? Or was something else using her, speaking through her? The rest of the day passed in a haze. Every sound felt amplified, stretched taut like nerves pulled thin. The ticking of clocks, the faint shifting of pipes, the distant hum of cars passing outside. All of it layered beneath the constant, oppressive sense of being watched. When evening came, Margaret retreated to her room without a word. I didn't question it. I sat on the couch, hands clasped tightly, listening to the house breathe, because that's what it felt like. Breathing, slow, rhythmic, alive. At midnight, I heard footsteps again, but they didn't come from the hallway. They came from the attic, heavy, dragging steps that moved from one end of the space to the other. My chest tightened. No one went into the attic. The hatch hadn't been opened in years. I strained to listen. The steps stopped suddenly, replaced by a hollow, scraping sound, like wood being gouged. My breath hitched. I forced myself to stand, though every instinct screamed at me to stay seated. Something inside me whispered, if I didn't face whatever was up there now, I'd never sleep again. The hallway was colder than before. My fingers shook as I pulled down the attic cord. Dust rained softly as the ladder unfolded. I climbed slowly, each rung vibrating under my weight. When my head rose above the floor of the attic, I saw it immediately. In the far corner, illuminated by the dim glow of the nightlight I never knew existed, was a fresh carving in the wooden beam. The letters, jagged, uneven, my name, again. Beneath it, the same two words I'd seen written on paper in my study. I hear you. This time, they looked carved by hand, a trembling hand, a desperate one. I stepped fully into the attic, my breath visible in pale streams. Then, I noticed something else. Footprints in the dust. Bare footprints, leading from the corner to the hatch. My heartbeat grew wild. They weren't mine. They weren't my wife's. They were small, frail, like the prints of someone who hadn't walked properly in a long time. A sudden thud echoed beneath me. Someone had closed the attic hatch. I spun toward it, rushing forward, but the ladder had been pulled up. I was trapped. And from the darkness behind me came the sound of slow, rattling breathing. I turned, every muscle in my body locked in terror. The attic was nearly pitch black, lit only by that faint, unnatural glow from the far corner. The breathing grew louder, rasping, broken, like lungs filled with dust. I couldn't see the source. I didn't want to, but something shuffled across the floorboards, and the thin veil of courage I'd been clinging to snapped. I backed away until my spine hit the wooden beam with a dull thud. The breathing stopped. Silence swept over the attic like a wave swallowing everything in its path. Then, slowly, the glow in the corner began to dim, not flicker, dim, as though something unseen was stepping in front of it, blocking the light. My own breath hitched in my throat. The darkness seemed to thicken, curling forward like a living thing. I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting the primal terror rising inside me. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I couldn't. Something brushed against my ankle. Cold, fragile, like of fingers. I snapped my eyes open and lurched forward, scrambling toward the hatch. My nails scraped the wood as I pounded on it, shouting for my wife, for anyone. The attic swallowed my voice whole. No footsteps, no response. Just the sound of something dragging itself slowly across the boards behind me, getting closer. I slammed my shoulder against the hatch. Once, twice. Pain exploded across my arm, but I didn't dare stop. The dragging sound halted. For a moment, I feared whatever was behind me had risen to its feet. Then, click. The latch loosened. The hatch dropped open. I didn't wait. I threw myself down the ladder, falling the last few steps and landing hard on the hallway floor. A sharp pain tore through my knee, but I scrambled backward anyway as the attic ladder swayed above me. Nothing emerged. The darkness at the top of the ladder seemed to pulse once before receding. I slammed the hatch shut with shaking hands, heart pounding so violently I thought I might faint. That night, I pushed a dresser beneath the attic hatch. Childish, maybe. Desperate, definitely. But the idea of that space above me, unsettled, awake, listening, I couldn't bear it. Margaret appeared in the hallway while I was still bracing the furniture against the ceiling. She stood silently, head tilted, her face half hidden by the shadows. I hadn't heard her door open. I hadn't heard her steps. She was simply there, watching. "What were you doing up there?" she asked softly. My mouth went dry. "You heard me?" Her smile spread slowly. "The house heard you." I wanted to demand what she meant, why she kept saying things like that, why she seemed to know more than she revealed. But my wife suddenly stepped into the hallway, rubbing her eyes, confused. "What's going on?" she mumbled. I looked at Margaret, but her expression had already changed. Sweet, innocent, concerned. She placed a gentle hand on my wife's arm. "He woke the house," she whispered, as if comforting her. "It happens." My wife stared at me, worry digging lines into her forehead. "Are you okay? You look pale." I forced a nod. "Just couldn't sleep." Margaret's voice drifted from behind her, soft and lilting. "None of us will, I'm afraid. None of us will, I'm afraid." The sentence clung to the air long after Margaret retreated into her room. My wife squeezed my shoulder gently before turning away, clearly too tired to untangle whatever strange tension hung in the hallway. I watched her disappear into our bedroom, the door closing with a soft click that felt far too final. The house fell quiet again, except for the faint creaks above, the restless weight of something shifting in the attic. I had just fled. The dresser beneath the hatch looked ridiculous, like a child's attempt at barricading a fortress, but I left it there. That night I lay awake beside my wife, listening to her breathing, trying to match its rhythm to calm my own. For a while, it worked. My eyelids grew heavy, my body sinking into the mattress. Then, somewhere between waking and sleep, I heard it. Not footsteps this time, not tapping in the walls. Scratching, soft at first, like nails dragging lightly across wood. It came from the inside of our bedroom door, long, deliberate strokes. Up, down, up, down. My eyes snapped open, staring at the dark outline of the door against the faint sliver of light from the hallway. The scratching grew a little louder, a little sharper, like whoever or whatever was doing. It was getting impatient. I held my breath. My wife didn't stir. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. She made a sleepy sound, rolled over, and pulled the blanket higher. The scratching stopped. Silence collapsed around us, heavy and complete. I considered getting up, opening the door, proving to myself that it was nothing more than my imagination. But the memory of the attic, of cold fingers brushing my ankle, held me in place like invisible hands pressing against my chest. Minutes passed, maybe hours. I drifted in and out of shallow, restless sleep. Each time I surfaced, I felt the same thing, the weight of eyes on me. Sometimes from the corner, near the closet. Sometimes from the far side of the room. Once, terrifyingly, from directly above my head, as if something lay on the ceiling, peering down through the darkness. When morning finally came, my throat felt raw, as though I'd been speaking all night. I dragged myself out of bed and walked slowly to the door. More scratches marked the wood now, clustered around the handle, thin, uneven lines, as if someone had been trying to get in or out. I swallowed hard and opened the door. Margaret stood in the hallway. I hadn't heard her approach. Her hand hovered inches from the doorknob, frozen mid-motion. For a heartbeat, her expression wasn't the usual soft, unsettling smile. It was blank, empty. Her eyes stared straight ahead, unfocused, as if she were listening to something distant. Then she blinked and looked at me. "Good morning," she said calmly, as though she hadn't just been reaching for our bedroom door at dawn. "You sleep any better?" I stared at her hand. The fingers were slightly reddened, the nails dulled, as if they'd been worn against something rough. "Did you need something?" I asked slowly. She glanced at the door, then back at me. "I heard you talking," she said. "Thought you might be on the phone. You sounded upset. Talking. My throat. The rawness." "What was I saying?" I asked, my voice barely steady. She tilted her head, that odd curiosity sharpening in her eyes. "You were asking someone to let you in," she murmured, over and over. Her voice dropped to a whisper, except the door was already open. A cold tremor crawled along my spine. I moved past her without answering, needing distance, needing coffee, needing anything that felt solid. The day moved in jerks and fragments. Every time I tried to focus on something, work, emails, cleaning, even just scrolling on my phone, something small would interrupt me. A picture frame sliding slightly out of alignment, a faint reflection in the TV screen behind me, gone the instant I turned. The low hum of Margaret's tune drifting from another room, following me like a smell. By late afternoon, I couldn't stand it anymore. I decided to leave the house just for an hour or two, get some air, clear my head. I grabbed my keys from the bowl near the door. They weren't there. I frowned, checking the table, the counter, the couch. Nothing. I always left them in the same spot, always. My chest tightened. I checked my jacket pockets, empty. I checked the kitchen drawers, irrational but thorough. Nothing. When I turned, Margaret was standing in the doorway, watching me. "Lose something?" she asked. "My keys," I said. "Have you seen them?" She blinked slowly, then shook her head. "No, but maybe the house doesn't want you to leave just yet." I forced a laugh that didn't sound like me. "Right, of course, haunted key bowl." She didn't smile. She just kept looking at me with that strange, almost sympathetic expression. "They always try to run," she said softly. "It never helps." The words slipped out of her so naturally that it took me a moment to process them. By the time I turned to question her, she'd already moved past me, humming her hollow tune as she disappeared into the hallway. I found the keys that evening. They were in my shoe, the one I never wore, the one I hadn't touched in months. The laces were tied in a series of intricate knots. I sat on the edge of the bed, turning the keys in my hand. My thoughts spiraled in tight, suffocating circles. Was Margaret doing this? Was she moving things, scratching doors, whispering at night just to watch me unravel? Or was something else using her presence as cover, hiding in the blind spots of my sanity? I decided to test it. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I set up my phone in the hallway, angled so it faced the attic hatch and Margaret's bedroom door. I turned off the hallway light, leaving only a small nightlight plugged into the socket. The dim orange glow cut the darkness into soft bands. I hit record and left the phone propped against the wall. If anything moved during the night, if the hatch opened, if someone walked the hallway, if Margaret wandered like a sleepwalker muttering to herself, I would see it. I would hear it. I would have something solid to hold on to. I barely slept. I lay in bed counting my own breaths, feeling each second crawl past like an insect. At some point, exhaustion dragged me under. When my eyes opened again, pale morning light leaked through the curtains. I jolted upright, heart pounding. The hallway was silent. The hatch was closed, the dresser still wedged beneath it. Margaret's door shut. My phone lay exactly where I left it. I snatched it up and hurried to my study, closing the door behind me. My hand shook as I scrolled through the footage, fast-forwarding through hours of stillness. The hallway remained unchanged, unmoved, the same static view. Until around 3:17 a.m., the nightlight flickered, once, twice. The screen shook slightly, though I hadn't touched the phone. Then, slowly, Margaret's door opened. No sound, no handle turning. It merely drifted inward as if pushed by a breath of wind. But it wasn't Margaret who stepped out. For several seconds there was nothing, just the dark rectangle of the doorway. Then a shape formed at its center, a darker patch of darkness, vaguely human, tall and thin. It stood there motionless, facing the camera. No features, just a void cut into the hallway. I froze, my thumb hovering over the screen. The shape didn't move. The nightlight dimmed again, as if something were standing directly in front of it, swallowing the light. The darkness stretched, elongated, reaching toward the phone, toward me. Then The screen went black. The recording resumed a few seconds later, the hallway empty, the nightlight steady again. Margaret's door closed. I swallowed, my mouth dry. I rewound the clip, watched it again and again. On the third viewing, I noticed something I had missed before. Just before the door opened, there was movement in the top corner of the screen, the attic hatch. It didn't open, but the ceiling around it seemed to bow downward slightly, as if something heavy had shifted its weight directly above the camera. I sat there for a long time, the phone resting cold in my hand. My mind rejected what I had seen, tried to repurpose it as a trick of the light, a glitch in the camera, anything. But deep inside, where logic couldn't quite reach, I knew. I wasn't imagining this. I decided to show the recording to my wife that evening. She had a day shift and would be home before dark for once. Maybe if she saw it, she'd understand. Maybe we could convince Margaret to move out sooner, find her another place, somewhere that didn't feel like it was swallowing us. When she came home, tired but smiling, I almost lost my nerve. For a moment, I wanted to hide it all, to pretend things were normal, to cling to our old life by sheer force of denial. But then I saw the way she glanced around the house, the quick, uncertain look she shot the ceiling, as if she, too, felt something watching. "Can we talk?" I asked. We sat on the couch. I opened the video, my heart beating too fast. "Just watch," I said, pressing play. The footage rolled, still hallway, faint orange light. I kept my eyes on her face. At 3:17, I saw the nightlight flicker. My wife frowned. "Why is it jumping like that?" she asked. "Just wait," I murmured. The door began to open. Except on this playback, nothing happened. The door remained firmly shut. I jerked my gaze to the screen. The nightlight flickered, yes, but the hallway stayed empty. No shape, no shifting darkness, no bowing ceiling. It was just a blank, uneventful recording of nothing at all. "No," I whispered. "No, that's not. Wait." I scrubbed back, forward, frame by frame. It was the same. Empty. "I don't understand," I said, my voice cracking. "It was there. I saw it. The door opened. There was something in the doorway. It was right there." My wife's expression softened with concern. "Babe," she said gently, "you've been under a lot of stress. With my mom here, the late shifts, the house needing repairs." "I'm not making this up," I snapped, louder than I intended. She flinched. "I didn't say you were," she replied quietly, "but maybe you're reading into things. You know how the mind works when you're exhausted. Shadows look like shapes. Tiny glitches seem like something more. It doesn't mean you're losing it. It just means you need rest." I wanted to argue, to scream, to force her to understand the way the air felt in this house, thick and watchful. But the words tangled in my throat. She leaned forward and squeezed my hand. "I'll talk to Mom," she said. "We'll figure something out. Maybe she can stay with my sister for a while. Just try not to spiral, okay?" She kissed my forehead and stood, heading toward the kitchen. I sat frozen, staring at the screen. The timestamp still read 3:17 a.m. But nothing moved at all. That night, Margaret knocked on my study door. I didn't invite her in. She did it anyway. She stepped inside with the same calm smile, her eyes wandering over the bookshelves, the desk, the phone still on the table. "You're scaring my daughter," she said pleasantly. I clenched my jaw. "I'm not doing anything." "You're talking about sounds only you hear, things only you see, and now you're waving recordings around. That show nothing." Her gaze slipped back to me. "That scares her." "There was something there," I said through my teeth. "The video changed. I didn't." She let the non-committal sound linger. Then she walked closer, moving with an eerie, unhurried grace. "This house doesn't like being watched," she murmured. "It's older than your cameras, older than your need to prove things. When you put eyes on it, it puts eyes on you." I stood slowly. "What do you know about this place, Margaret?" She smiled, and for the first time it didn't look like a mask. It looked tired. "I know more than you," she said simply. "Did something happen here before we moved in?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached out and brushed the edge of the desk with her fingertips. "Your wife was very young when her father started hearing things," she said. "He thought it was the neighbors at first. Radios, old plumbing, the usual excuses. Then he started seeing things only he could see. Doors opening by themselves. Shadows moving in the corners, whispering under the floorboards." My stomach dropped. "You lived in a house like this before?" She laughed softly. "No," she said. "This house." My skin prickled. "What are you talking about? We bought this place from some older couple. They'd lived here since the 80s. She tilted her head, considering me. "People change names. Houses change hands. The bones stay the same." Her eyes hardened. "Your wife doesn't remember the worst of it. I made sure of that, but I remember everything." I stared at her, my heart pounding. "You lived here with her father," I said slowly. "And he lost it?" "He started spending time in the attic," she said, as though answering a different question. "Talking to the walls, scratching things into the beams. He said the house listened. He said it answered." My breath caught. What happened to him? For a moment, her calm facade cracked. Something dark flickered behind her eyes. "One night," she murmured, "he locked himself in there and wouldn't come down. He screamed until his voice broke. Then it went quiet. When they finally opened the hatch, he was sitting in the corner, staring at the wall, smiling. He never stopped smiling after that." She took a step closer. I could see fine lines around her mouth now, etched deep by years of strain. "You think I don't recognize what's happening to you?" she whispered. "You think I don't see the same patterns, the same obsession with noises, with shadows, with proof?" I swallowed, my throat tight. "If you know, then why would you bring us here? Why would you move back into this place?" "Because the house doesn't forget," she said softly. "It remembers who escaped." The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "Escaped?" I repeated. Her eyes locked onto mine, unblinking. "It wanted him," she said. "It wants you now." I laughed, but the sound came out thin and shaky. "You're telling me this house is, what, alive? Evil? And it's trying specifically to break me?" She leaned in so close I could feel the cold of her breath on my face. "It likes the ones who think they're rational," she whispered. "The ones who resist. They don't snap all at once. They splinter slowly." My hands dug into the edge of the desk. "You're trying to drive me insane," I said hoarsely, "just like it did to your husband." She smiled again, that eerie, familiar curve of lips. "I'm trying to make sure it takes you instead of her," she said. The room felt suddenly too small, the walls quietly pressing inward. "What?" I hissed. Her eyes glistened with age and exhaustion and something colder. "It doesn't stop," she said. "It followed us for years, in small ways, flickering lights, voices in the next room. Her father never really came back from that attic. He was a shell it carried around. It waited. It watched my daughter grow. I could feel it." Her hands trembled slightly at her sides. When she told me she'd bought a house, I knew which one it would be. It was waiting. I shook my head. "That's insane. That's why I came," she interrupted sharply. "To stand between it and her, to draw its attention, to remind it there's someone else it can hollow out instead." Silence crashed down between us. "And that someone else is me," I said slowly. She nodded once, as if we had finally reached an understanding. "You're strong," she murmured. "You won't fall as fast. That's what it likes. It gives me time to keep her safe." I stared at her, trying to process the twisted logic. "By gaslighting me," I said, "by scratching doors and moving keys and humming in the middle of the night, you're helping?" "I'm feeding it what it wants," she said. "Fear, obsession, attention. You're already bleeding it. You just haven't realized." My heart thundered in my chest. "You're insane," I said. "You need help." "Maybe," she replied. "Maybe I broke with him. Maybe this house cracked something in me that never healed. But whether I'm crazy or not doesn't change the fact that it's awake again. And it likes you." She turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Don't bother trying to leave," she added, without looking back. "It will let you go if it wants you to bring it more. Otherwise, you'll just find new ways to circle back to it." The door clicked shut behind her. For a long moment, I just stood there, shaking. Then I grabbed my phone, my wallet, my jacket. I didn't look at the ceiling. I didn't look at the attic hatch. I walked straight to the front door, opened it, and stepped outside. The air hit me like a slap, fresh, cool. Unfiltered by old walls and stale whispers, I stood on the porch, breathing deeply, forcing the fog in my head to clear. I walked down the steps, across the yard, to the car. The keys slid into the ignition without resistance. The engine started. No flickering lights, no sudden silence, no invisible force pinning me in place. I pulled out of the driveway and didn't look in the rearview mirror. I drove with no destination, just motion. Streets blurred past. People walked dogs, carried groceries, laughed on their phones. The ordinary world felt unreal, like a film laid over something darker. After an hour or so, I parked near a small coffee shop. I went inside, ordered something hot I didn't taste, and sat in a corner, forcing myself to listen to the mundane sounds around me. Cups clinking, quiet conversations. Music playing too softly to recognize. Nothing whispered my name. Nothing scratched at the walls. For a moment, I wondered if all of it, every shadow, every sound, had been a construct of my own mind, amplified by Margaret's strange behavior and the weight of her stories. Maybe I was becoming the problem. Maybe I was carrying the house with me. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my wife. "Mom says you left. Is everything okay?" I stared at the message, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Another text arrived before I could respond. Also, "Did you take something from the attic? There's scratching up there again. She looks scared." A cold wave washed over me. I hadn't touched the attic since that night. My reflection stared back at me from the dark screen. Tired eyes, pale face. I looked like someone telling ghost stories to himself. I typed back with stiff fingers, "Get out of the house, now, take Mom, go to your sister's, please." The typing dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "What's going on?" she replied. "We can't just leave. Dinner's on. Mom's not feeling well." "And what do you mean, again?" "She says it never stopped." I swallowed hard. I thought about calling, about driving straight home, about storming in, dragging them both out, forcing them to see what I felt pressing against my bones. Instead, I sat there, paralyzed by a fear that no longer cared whether it was irrational or justified. The world around me remained utterly, infuriatingly normal. I didn't remember driving home. One moment, I was in the coffee shop, my cup half full. The next, I was turning onto our street, the house rising at the end of the lane like a patient, watching thing. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. The windows were dark, except for a faint glow upstairs. The attic. I parked in the driveway and sat there, engine idling, as if the car could shield me. It couldn't. The feeling started even before I stepped out, the sense of being noticed. Not merely seen, not merely watched, noticed. As if something stored my presence in a catalog of things it owned. I killed the engine and got out. The front door was unlocked. The house felt wrong the moment I stepped inside. Too quiet, in a way that suggested noise was being held back rather than absent. The air smelled faintly of dust and something older, metallic, like the inside of a forgotten box. "Hello?" I called. No answer. I moved through the hallway, heart pounding. The kitchen was empty, dinner cold on the stove, untouched. A pot of something congealed and thick. 2 plates set on the table. No one there. "Margaret? Honey?" Silence. A faint scraping sound drifted from upstairs. I almost turned around, almost walked back out, got in the car, and kept driving until the house was nothing but a memory. But something stronger than fear held me. Some jagged combination of guilt, anger, and a desperate need to not abandon the people I loved to whatever this was. I climbed the stairs. The scraping grew louder. It wasn't frantic. It was slow, steady, like someone drawing a pattern over and over into wood. The attic hatch glowed faintly from the edges as if there were light above. The dresser I had wedged beneath it was pushed aside. I stared at it, my breath shallow. It was a heavy dresser. I'd struggled to move it under the hatch. Now, it sat neatly against the wall, as though it had never been used as a barricade. "Margaret," I said, hating the way my voice shook. No answer. I pulled the cord. The ladder unfolded. The scraping stopped. I climbed. The attic was brighter than I expected. A single bulb hung from the rafters, casting a sickly, pale light. Dust motes floated like drifting ash. The air was colder, biting the inside of my lungs. Margaret sat in the far corner. Her back was to me. Her hand moved slowly across the wooden beam, something small gripped between her fingers. I stepped closer, my footsteps echoing hollowly. "Margaret," I said. "Where's my wife?" She didn't turn. Her hand moved again, scraping, pausing, scraping. "Margaret," I repeated louder. "Where is she?" She stopped. Her shoulders rose and fell in a slow, shallow breath. Then, without looking back, she spoke. "She finally heard it," she murmured. "She's been hearing it all day." My skin crawled. "Hearing what?" "The voice under the house," she said. "The one that keeps asking the same question." My throat tightened. The floorboards creaked slightly beneath my feet. "What question?" I asked. Her hand resumed its movement. "It wants to know who will stay," she whispered. who will stay with it forever. Something moved in the corner of my eye. I turned my head, heart freezing in my chest. The far wall, once empty and bare, was covered in words. They crawled across the beams and boards, etched deep into the wood. Some were fresh and bright, others faded and worn, layered over each other in tangled lines. I stepped closer, feeling my pulse in my throat. Scrawled across the wood, repeating like a chant, was my name. Dozens of times. Hundreds. Some writing was Margaret's, some wasn't. In the center of it all, larger than the rest, were 3 words carved so deeply the wood splintered around them. I hear you. I stumbled back, my heel catching on something. I looked down. There, on the floor, were more marks, tiny grooves, as if nails had been dragged again and again into the wood by someone desperate to leave a message no one would ever read. A soft sound drifted from Margaret. At first, I thought she was crying. Then I realized she was laughing. They all say the same thing at the end, she said quietly. They all ask, is it really there? Or am I just losing my mind? She turned her head slightly, just enough for me to see the edge of her smile, as if the answer makes any difference. Where is my wife? I repeated, my voice coming out sharper than I intended. She pointed upward. I followed her gesture. The ceiling beams were bare. Then the light flickered. And for a fraction of a second, I saw her, my wife. She was standing on the beam as if it were the floor, her body aligned with the wood, her head tilted downward, hair hanging in front of her face. Her arms hung limply at her sides. Her eyes were open, staring straight at me. I blinked. She was gone. My heart hammered against my ribs. What did you do? I shouted. I didn't bring her up here, Margaret replied calmly. The house did. It needed her to hear it, to feel what you feel, so she'd understand why one of you has to stay. I took a step toward her. We're all leaving, I said. Tonight. I'm not playing this game anymore. She turned fully then, for the first time. Her face was pale. Her eyes were ringed with dark circles that spoke of hundreds of nights like the ones I had just begun to endure. You still think you're the one playing, she said softly. That's the problem. A thud echoed from below. We both froze. Another thud, heavier, closer. It came from the first floor. Margaret smiled faintly. It's moving, she whispered. It's choosing. I ran to the hatch, nearly losing my footing on the ladder in my rush downward. The hallway was empty. The bedroom doors stood open. The air felt thick, too cold for the time of year. Hello, I shouted. Where are you? A soft sound drifted from the living room. Not a thud this time. A murmur, a voice. I moved toward it, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. My wife stood in the center of the living room. She was facing the wall, one hand pressed against it. Her lips moved soundlessly. Her eyes were wide, fixed on something I couldn't see. Honey, I said gently, approaching her. We need to go. Now. She didn't respond. Her fingers traced along the wall, following invisible lines. Honey? I reached out and touched her shoulder. She flinched violently, jerking away as though I'd burned her. Her eyes snapped to mine, and for a moment I saw only raw terror in them. Don't touch me, she gasped. It doesn't like that. My blood ran cold. What doesn't? She glanced past me, over my shoulder, toward the hallway. It's been talking all day, she whispered. I thought it was you at first. Then I thought I was losing it, but it's louder now, clearer. My hands trembled. What is it saying? She swallowed. It says it's tired of waiting, she murmured. It says one of us has to stay, for good, or it will take both of us. My vision blurred at the edges. We're leaving, I said firmly. Right now. Go get your things. She shook her head, eyes brimming with tears. You don't understand, she said. It's not about suitcases. It's not about doors. It doesn't care where we go. It cares who listens, who believes. A floorboard creaked behind me. Slowly, I turned. Margaret stood in the doorway watching us. For the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. You shouldn't have both listened, she whispered. It complicates things. Something moved between us, not visible, not tangible in any normal sense, but I felt it. A pressure in the air, like being caught between two magnets facing the wrong way. It pushed against my chest, then against hers, as though weighing us, smelling us. My wife squeezed her eyes shut. Make it stop, she whispered. Please. I stepped toward her, placing myself between her and whatever it was. Take me, I said before I realized I was speaking. The words ripped out of me like they'd been waiting for a gap. If something has to stay, it's me. Just leave them alone. Margaret inhaled sharply. My wife stared at me, tears spilling over. The pressure in the room shifted. The house seemed to exhale. For the first time since we'd moved in, the silence was complete. No creaks, no whispers. Just a stillness so deep it felt like the space between heartbeats. Then, from somewhere deep in the walls, a slow, dragging sound began. It sank downward, through the floor, into the foundation. I felt it in my bones. My wife clutched my arm. What did you just do? She whispered. I gave it what it wanted, Margaret said quietly. An answer. The days after that blurred. The sounds didn't stop. If anything, they grew more structured. The tapping became rhythmic, almost conversational. The whispers, no longer soft and shapeless, threaded themselves into words I could nearly understand. Sometimes they came from the vents, sometimes from under the floor, sometimes from inside my own head. I stopped telling my wife about what I was hearing. She had enough in her eyes already, a haunted look that hadn't existed before we moved here. Margaret drifted through the house like a resigned sentinel, watching me, listening to the same silence I did, and hearing something else in it. Sleep became an unreliable visitor. When it came, it brought dreams of endless corridors, of doors that led back into the same room, of the attic stretching farther and farther until it was larger than the house itself. Each time I woke, I felt a little less anchored to the person I'd been. The house, in its own way, was patient. It didn't rush the process. It simply waited every night at the edge of my thoughts, pressing in, testing, fracturing. One evening, about a week after that night in the living room, my wife packed a bag. I can't do this anymore, she said, her voice shaking but resolute. I love you. I love my mom. But I can't sleep here. I can't think here. It's like the walls are always leaning in. I stood in the doorway, numb. Where will you go? To my sister's, she said. For a few days, maybe more. You could come. We could figure out what to do next. Sell the house. Get help. Something. The house seemed to listen. The lights flickered once. I felt the now familiar pressure around my ribs. I can't, I heard myself say. Not yet. Her face crumpled. Why? I didn't have a logical answer. The only truth I could articulate was terrible in its simplicity. Because it hasn't let me, I whispered. She stared at me for a long time, tears forming in her eyes. Then she stepped forward, and kissed my cheek. "This isn't you," she said softly. "This house is eating you alive." She turned and walked out. Margaret didn't try to stop her. She watched her daughter leave with an expression that was part grief, part relief. When the door closed, the house felt smaller, quieter, hungrier. That night, Margaret knocked on my door again. She looked more exhausted than ever. "It's almost done," she said simply. I laughed bitterly. "What is? My sanity?" She considered. "Your resistance," she said. "Once that goes, the rest gets easier." "For who?" I asked. "You? The house?" "For everyone," she murmured. "You'll stop fighting. It will stop struggling. And she'll be safe." A strange, hollow calm settled over me then. The fight had been draining everything I had. Part of me wanted to stop, to let go, to sink into whatever the house wanted me to be, if it meant no more nights listening to walls breathe. "Will I hurt her?" I asked quietly. "Later, when I'm like your husband?" Margaret hesitated. "No," she said at last. "If she doesn't come back, if she doesn't listen again." I nodded slowly. "Then this is it," I said. "This is how it ends." "For you," she said. "Yes." She turned to leave. At the doorway, she paused. "For what it's worth," she added, "I'm sorry. The last thing I expected to feel was pity." "You stayed," I said, "all this time, between it and her, whatever else you've done. I know that." She didn't look back. The house didn't need the attic anymore. It had already moved in. The whispers came closer now, no longer filtered by wood or plaster. They curled through my thoughts like smoke, filling the empty spaces. Sometimes they used my voice, sometimes my wife's, sometimes voices I didn't recognize at all. "You were always going to belong to something," they told me. "You chose us." I don't remember when I started talking back. It didn't feel like surrender. It felt like conversation. The scratching in the walls changed too, less frantic, more deliberate, like writing. Sometimes, when I pressed my ear to the plaster, I could almost make out words. Margaret kept her distance. She moved quietly, cooked simple meals, cleaned in silence. Occasionally, I'd catch her watching me with that old, clinical attention, as if taking notes on a process she'd seen before and never wanted to see again. "Do you hear it?" I asked her once. "All the time," she said. "I just stopped answering." "Did he?" I asked. "Your husband?" She looked away. "He thought he could bargain with it," she said. "Make deals, set terms. He thought he could stay half in, half out." Her eyes met mine again. "That's not how this works." "Then how does it work?" I asked. She smiled sadly. "You already know," she said. "You offered yourself. It accepted. There are gaps after that. Moments that should connect, but don't. I remember standing in the kitchen, staring at a knife in my hand, tracing the reflection of my own eyes in the blade. Then I remember standing in the living room, talking to the corner where the two walls meet the ceiling, as if something were perched there, listening politely. I remember laughing at a joke no one told. I remember waking up in the attic, dust in my hair, new words carved into the beams in handwriting I don't recognize, but feel in the ache of my own fingers. I remember Margaret's voice, far away and thin, saying, "Don't open that door," and my hand already on the knob. I remember the feeling of crossing a line I couldn't see. And I remember this. One night, as the house settled around me, With a familiar, possessive creak, the whispers quieted. Something new took their place. A single voice, my own, speaking from the walls. "Can you hear me?" it asked. I sat on the floor of the living room, knees drawn up, listening. "Yes," I whispered. "I hear you." The voice sounded relieved. "Good," it said. "That means you're almost here." I didn't ask where here was. I already knew. The lines between inside and outside, between house and inhabitant, had long since started to blur. I moved through rooms that felt like thoughts. I slept in spaces that felt like memories. Sometimes I couldn't remember whether I was sitting on a chair or wrapped around a beam. Margaret grew quieter as I grew stranger. One morning, I came downstairs and she was gone. Her room was empty, the bed neatly made, her few belongings packed, no note, no explanation. Only one thing remained on her nightstand, a small, folded piece of paper, my name on the front. I opened it with numb fingers. Inside, in her shaky handwriting, were 4 words: "Don't let it write you." I stared at the note for a long time. The walls around me hummed softly, like a throat clearing. "You don't need her anymore," the house whispered. "You have us." I laughed. I couldn't tell where the laughter was coming from. Maybe you're wondering, by now, why I'm telling you all this. Why, if I'm as far gone as I sound, I can still put these words in order. Still explain the sequence of events that led me from rational skepticism to talking to the corners of my own ceiling. The truth is, I'm not completely sure. Maybe this is what Margaret meant. Maybe this is the last part of the process. Not it writing me writing it. Every house has a story. This one needed a narrator, someone to put its hunger into sentences, to spell out its patience, its method, its favorite kind of mind. Someone to say, "This is how it starts," so you can recognize it when it happens to you, because it doesn't always begin with an attic. Sometimes it's a flicker in the light you can't quite explain. A whisper you hear when you're alone. A shape in the corner of a room you know is empty. A feeling that your keys are never where you left them. A sense that the place you live in is watching you back. You tell yourself you're stressed, tired, paranoid. You're probably right. At first. Then you start needing proof. You set up cameras. You record audio. You replay it over and over, convincing yourself there was something there in the static. You show it to someone else. And when the recording plays back as nothing at all, you feel that hollow drop in your stomach. You start to wonder if the problem isn't the house, or the camera, or the light. You start to wonder if the problem is you. That's when it gets interested. That's when it leans in. That's when it starts to hear you. "I don't know where my wife is now. I hope she stayed away." Sometimes, late at night, I think I hear her footsteps on the porch, her key in the lock, her voice calling my name. But the house is very good at copying voices if it thinks it will make you turn your head. I don't go to the door anymore. I don't trust what's on the other side. I don't leave much of anywhere. The house doesn't stop me exactly. It just makes everywhere else feel thinner, less real, like a dream you can walk out of, only to find yourself waking up back where you started, here, with it, with us. I can feel it in the beams below my feet, in the nails holding the walls together, in the wires carrying its soft, static murmurs. It's old, older than my mother-in-law's stories, older than the previous owners, older than whatever name this street used to have. It isn't evil in the way people think. It's just hungry. It likes certain flavors more than others. Skeptics, rationals, people who need the world to make sense. They crack the loudest when the rules change. Maybe that's why it wanted me. Or maybe Margaret was right, and I offered myself without realizing what that meant. Either way, the arrangement feels settled now. It doesn't have to chase my sanity anymore. It wears it. And I, in return, wear it. The house. My house. Our house. Sometimes when the nights are especially long, when the wind rattles the windows and the old pipes moan, I sit in the dark and imagine someone else moving in years from now. Someone who thinks they're just getting a good deal on an old place with character. Someone who doesn't listen closely enough to the stories. Someone like you. Maybe you'll walk these floors one day. Maybe you already live somewhere that hums when it shouldn't, that creaks in rooms you're not in, that remembers more than it should. If you do, and if you ever find words scratched faintly into the wood, half sanded, half painted over, if you ever hear a whisper that sounds a little too much like your own voice coming back to you from the walls, listen closely, because it's listening back. And if you start to wonder whether it's all in your head, whether you're just tired, stressed, imagining things, well, that's usually the moment it chooses, the moment you start asking the same question I once did. Is it really there? Or am I just losing my mind? Tell me, if it were you standing here instead of me, with the house pressing in and the shadows leaning closer, what would you believe, and which of us would you say is truly losing their mind?